Involvement with the criminal justice system is life-changing. It matters.
Having a justice system that works is a really important part of a democratic society.
I'm Penelope Gibbs, Director of Transform Justice.
I'm Rob Allen. I've worked in and around criminal justice all my career.
This is the Transform Justice podcast, throwing light on the criminal justice system.
Hearing from people who know.
It's about whether the system's fair
and what can be done to make it better.
Today we're going to return to a subject we've touched on a couple of times, restorative justice, often known as RJ. Rob Allen and I are joined by two champions of it, Paul Kohler, Liberal Democrat MP for Wimbledon, and Lucy Jaffe, restorative justice consultant. Rob, is RJ an approach that you've come across in your work over the years?
Well, yes. I remember in particular a charitable project called Rethinking Crime and Punishment, which I ran 20-odd years ago, and we did quite a lot to try and promote RJ. And by that, I mean a variety of approaches that bring people together who've been affected by a crime outside the courtroom to try and understand the impact of what's happened and find ways to repair the harm that's been done. We funded some research that found that victims who choose to participate generally get more out of that process than they do out of the courts, and that people who commit crimes generally reoffend less when they go through a successful RJ program. So it's got an immense amount of value.
And you believe in it?
I do.
Lucy, we're here with Paul Kohler, MP. How did you meet him?
I was running a charity called Why Me, which was set up by a victim of crime to open up access to restorative justice to everybody affected by crime and conflict. And Paul's case was in the newspapers and on the television. There was a lot of publicity about it. And the thing that really struck me is that he stood up afterwards and said, "Why me?" And I thought, because my antennae was always out for people who'd been affected by crime who weren't getting the answers they wanted from court. So I tracked Paul down and approached him and said, would you be interested in pursuing that question of why me?
Can we go back then, Paul? Can you just give a very brief description of the crime you were a victim of?
I was at home with my wife and one of my daughters. There's a knock at the door and 4 men rushed through, started beating me up, demanding to find out where the money was. We think it was a drug debt and they'd gone to the wrong address.
And they were armed?
No, they weren't armed. No, they were masked and beating me.
And then in terms of the attack, they were just trying to get you to give your money to them.
They kept using the definite article, where's the money? The money, as if there was a specific sort of debt or amount of money they were after. 2 of them ran upstairs and didn't attack my wife, but they physically intimidated her, put a hood on her, threatened her, made her lie down. My daughter at the top of the stairs wasn't discovered and she rang the police, and that's what saved my life.
So were your injuries such that you needed to go to hospital?
Oh, yes, they were very severe. And I was about to be dispatched had it not been for 2 brave police officers rushing through the door and jumping on one of them just as he was about to kill me.
Right. Just to give a context, this was around 10 years ago, was it?
It was 2014, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very, very sorry. Clearly a immensely traumatic episode, particularly given so sudden.
I mean, before this awful incident, did you know anything about restorative justice?
No. Lucy and her colleague contacted me and told me about restorative justice, of which I knew nothing, even though I was the head of the law school at SOAS, which has got quite a reputation on restorative justice. I'm a property lawyer. So Lucy had to tell me about restorative justice and explain it to me. And the first time I was on radio, I called it retributive justice, which is not the same thing at all.
It's rather the opposite, isn't it?
I think the other thing that really struck me, you had questions about like why they'd done it,
yes.
And you didn't get that through court, and you didn't, as a victim of crime, even through your impact statement, have an opportunity to get an answer to that question or even to enter into any kind of dialogue. It was all through that victim impact statement.
Yeah, the victim impact statement is really important. If someone gets attacked by academics as being pointless, it was really useful for my family to
What is it? Well, I don't think we've ever really explained on this podcast what it is.
It's where the victim is given a point in the proceedings after a guilty verdict, but before the actual sentence, the victim is allowed to say how it impacted them, gives them a moment in the proceedings to say the effect it had on them, their family, etc. It's really important. It's sometimes seen as just a sop to victims. I think it's really effective, particularly with my judge, and she made reference to what I'd said in this victim statement when she was giving her judgment. It doesn't affect the judgment, it doesn't affect the sentence, but for her to reference what I'd said was really important.
So just to be clear, you approached Paul after the court case?
No. You approached me very early on.
And at that stage, you and your family were open to this possibility?
I was utterly intrigued by it. My wife and daughter were definitely less keen, but I persuaded them we should go ahead with it.
You've explained that you thought that perhaps these people had come to the wrong address and it was a huge mistake. Was that part of why you thought you wanted to get to the bottom of that, or was it something else?
No, without a doubt, the main driver at that point was why did they do it? As an academic, I was quite intrigued by the whole concept. So I wanted to explore that as well.
And people think that the court process is going to tell them why a crime happened. Is that not your perception of your court process?
A legal case tells them what happened. It often doesn't say why it happened. And sometimes it's obvious it was to rob someone to get some money. But even then, it doesn't explain the motivation of the person that attacked. And that's what you as a victim want to find out. Why did they do it to us? Why did it do it to me? Why was I picked out?
But it's also, I found with speaking to many people who are survivors of crime, they all have different questions. So everyone has a different question. Like, what did you do with my grandmother's locket when you stole it? And motivation, as Paul says, is often also really important to understand and just to get a bit more information. But I think what's really important is where the person who's most affected, i.e. the victims of crime, can ask those questions.
And they can't in the court?
You can't. You can in France, but you can't in the UK. You're not allowed to interrogate the person that's committed the crime against you. And so when I was running Why Me, the charity, and I still now have this antennae for these unanswered questions that hang and traumatise people and go round and round and round their heads, along with things like shame. Was I responsible? Could I have done something differently? If I'd done that, then my children would be affected. And someone else we worked with called Janika,
who was on our podcast.
Who was on your podcast and who had all these questions and typed in Why Me into the search engine, and up popped Why Me, the charity. And we managed to get her restorative justice and organise it. But people just don't know about it.
In Paul's case, you were able to get a restorative meeting off the ground involving, I think, one of the attackers, and there were four, I think. You said, why was only one of them involved?
Well, we very carefully risk assess everybody. So we assess if it's safe for them to participate, if we believe that's going to re-traumatise them in any way. And
you
also
mean the victim or the person who did the crime?
Or the person who committed the crime. So the person who committed the crime may not be in a fit state, or they may still be saying, why me? Because they're in prison. When we went and met each of the four, all of them were saying, why did I get such a long sentence? I'm feeling sorry for themselves. Some of them we could work with to sort of get underneath that. Why did you do the act in the first place? And get them to think about the impact of what they've done. But if you can't get past that first me, like thinking about myself, if I've committed a crime, or that they're justifying what they've done, you would not want to then proceed and put them
in front of the victim. That is exactly what you don't want.
Yeah, it's a delicate process. And we took over a year, I think, working with Paul to prepare. And then we also went and visited all the four. And to answer your question, Rob, about why only one. So one was suitable, ready and willing to participate.
What, you felt his motivation was sound, as it were?
Yeah, at that time. So it's not fixed in time. So if we did have the kind of glorious restorative justice paradise that I sometimes dream about, people can come back at any stage during their lives and say, is the person who attacked me now ready and willing to participate?
Yeah. And you were steadfastly keen to do this throughout this year of preparation, Paul, were you?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And when it finally happened, this meeting, was there one moment in it where your view of the person changed in any way, or?
Well, it was, yes. The three of us went in with different questions.
This is you, your wife, and
and my eldest daughter, who was present. So I went in, wanted to find out why they'd done it. My wife wanted to go in to tell them how she felt, how angry she felt with him. My daughter, we thought naively at the time, wanted to find out how he was going to change his life. Interestingly, that became the question we all focused on. So we had this meeting. It was choreographed. It was all planned beforehand, how we would sit. We were sitting in a semicircle. He came into the room with the chaplain, who was the go-between, and his representative. And he was very nervous. We were very nervous. Everyone was trembling, actually. He was trembling particularly. We sat down. He was Polish, so he had an interpreter there. And we had a faltering discussion over a couple of hours. And quite early on, I asked him why he did it. And he wasn't going to tell me. He made some reference. I can't remember what the excuse he gave now. But it was obviously he didn't know, or it made no sense what he said. And if you think about it, if it was what I suspect it was, which was chasing a drug debt and they went to the wrong address, someone had got them to do that, and therefore they weren't going to get that person, bring them into the whole thing. So it petered out, that conversation. It got nowhere. Then my wife started telling him how angry she felt, what he had done to her family. And he stopped her and said, look, I know how angry you were. I saw your face on the night. I know how angry you were. And then he apologised. This was about half an hour, 45 minutes in. And then the rest of the 2 hours was spent testing the authenticity of that apology. And how did you test how authentic it was? It was what he was going to do with his life now. And so therefore my daughter's, what we thought was a naive question, became absolutely all important, because that was the way by which we judged how authentic his apology was.
In the end, did you think it was authentic?
I did, and at the end I shook his hand. All three of us shook his hand. My wife still regrets that. My wife wishes she hadn't have done that. She felt she did it as a matter of sort of the manners of the moment. But to me, yeah, I felt, yes, you mean that. At this moment in time, at least you mean it. You're going to change your life. And I'll accept your apology. And to an extent, I said this in the past, forgiving is quite a selfish act, because when you forgive someone, it empowers you. I'm now in charge. I'm no longer beholden to you. And so I found forgiving very empowering.
But it is also a choice. You don't have to forgive in order to do restorative justice, and the person who does the crime doesn't have to apologise. A lot of it is kind of worked on in advance about what does the person who's been most affected want, and what does the person who did it, what are they able to offer, if you like, in that dialogue. And so the restorative work is all around that, where people can bring the humanity back into justice, and people come up with their own solutions. And every single one is bespoke and different, which is the magic of it, because everyone's needs are different. So you don't know what the impact is of your actions when you commit a crime. You can see some of it, but you literally don't know what the traumatic kind of impact is and what the ripple effect is. And restorative justice kind of addresses that without intermediaries. So restorative facilitators hold a space, but they don't tell people what to think.
They're the
do.
sort of organisers and supporters of the process, of this meeting between the victim
Navigators.
and the person who did the crime.
There are lots of restoratively trained people in England and Wales who work within the criminal justice system. There's lots of people who work with young people in the youth justice system, and there's also restorative justice services provided by all the police and crime commissioners in England and Wales.
Yeah. In your case, Paul, you've talked very powerfully about the meeting and the effect on you kind of within the meeting. Did this restorative justice process have a long-term effect on you and your life?
That's an interesting question. I think I had addressed the issue. I didn't have some post-traumatic stress or anything. The attack had an effect on my life. I wouldn't be an MP today had I not been a victim of the attack. So that whole process changed me. I wouldn't say RJ in particular transformed my life. No, I wouldn't go that far.
But in a sense, the absence of post-traumatic stress might have been partly due to the restorative justice process.
I think we'd be romanticising it then. We're talking now 18 months after it. After a couple of weeks, I wasn't having nightmares about it or anything.
Good. Glad to hear it.
I mean, it sounds that the experience was a relatively positive one for you.
Oh, it was hugely positive. No, it was hugely positive. But it's important that we don't romanticise the whole process. As Lucy has said, it's bespoke, it's different for every person. What's important is it's the victim being at the centre of the process and getting out of it what they want. And it's not a perfect process by any means. With my meeting, he was meant to write a letter a year later telling us how he'd progressed. That letter never came.
So you don't actually know if he's turned around his life?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know where he is now, or any of them are now. They must all be out of prison by now.
I mean, Lucy, do you know? I mean, we've heard about the impact on Paul, but in terms of the impact on the person who took part, the person who attacked Paul, do we know whether his good intentions to change his life expressed in the meeting turned into reality?
I don't know. We work within a criminal justice system that's quite difficult to access people and navigate. And we did follow up and say, can you write the letter? And that wasn't forthcoming. In my view, we should have the resources to go back and ask, where is he now? One of the challenges is that follow-up to the outcome agreement. So at the end of each meeting, you have an outcome agreement, and it's really the offender managers who need to pursue that. But prisons are chaotic, and police, probation and prisons, they all need to understand restorative justice and the importance of that outcome agreement and following it up.
But sort of moving back, I guess, to the shorter term impact. I mean, did you have the chance to talk to the person who attacked Paul after the meeting? Was their view of the meeting a positive one, do you think? Was there any feedback from his side? Or
yes, so there was also concern from him. There was publicity following the meeting, and so he was concerned about the potential for retribution within the prison for having gone and spoken to the victim of his crime, and that being seen almost in the grassing kind of area, and that made communication with him tricky. So that skewed things a bit.
Yeah, it was a bit messy in that respect. But, and that's life. Life is messy. It's a hugely positive process. And part of why it's positive is because it's not down a certain track. It's an iterative process that changes with regard to the particular characters involved. So the fact that it's messy comes hand in hand with the process.
And for all we know, he might have completely changed his life around as a result and be a different person.
Yeah. And the evidence suggests that clearly RJ does positively affect recidivism. But in fact, that's not as important to me as the fact that I believed at the time when he was talking to me, he wanted to change his life. That gave authenticity to his apology. Whether he succeeded or not, it's great if he did. That doesn't actually affect the apology, because my view was, and that of my daughter at least was, it was an utterly genuine apology. And we quizzed him so hard for that hour about his plans. Whether he succeeded, well, that's a secondary issue.
Looking at other cases of RJ, there's a play, The Punch, which has had a huge success. And it's about a restorative justice process and a meeting between the parents of a young man who died as a result of a single punch and his attacker. Looking kind of more broadly, Lucy, do you think the big success of that play will inspire enthusiasm for restorative justice in general? Is this the touch paper?
The play Punch, which is based on Jacob Dunn's story, is...
Jacob Dunn being the attacker.
Dunn being the person who committed the crime, is based around him meeting the mother of the man who died as a result of his actions, is so powerful. It has massively boosted the publicity around restorative justice and what it means and how it works. My concern is with individual cases, sometimes people say, well, that's that person or that's that crime. You start to get sort of exceptional cases rather than people thinking, well, that could be me.
Well, Paul, what do you think? Do you think it could be a bit of a game changer?
First of all, the parents of someone who's died to go through RJ is an incredible thing to do. It's phenomenal. As a parent, I can't imagine me going through that process, I have to say. And that play is an amazing play going through that journey. My concerns about the play, which I think is great and very important for publicity, my concerns about it were lurking in Lucy's answer, where she said that it's the story of Jacob Dunn. No, it's not. It's the story about James Hodgkinson, the victim, or it should be. because we must remember RJ is about putting the victim at the heart of the process. That play is not from the victim's perspective for obvious reasons. It's from the perpetrator's perspective. And I think the danger of the play is we start focusing again on the perpetrator. Now, I understand why the dynamics of the play had to be about the perpetrator. And without a doubt, the parents feature in it. They are very much support actors to the perpetrator. So my concern is that it shifts the focus. It's absolutely crucial to me that the central importance of RJ is putting the victim at the heart of the process. We sell it to the Ministry of Justice on a quite different level, that it will cut recidivism rates, i.e. it's all about the perpetrators. And I think the play does feed into that problem.
I mean, in the play, the lad that kills James gets a relatively short sentence, and there's a scene I remember from it where the parents are appalled at how short the sentence was, and, you know, is this justice? And in a sense, it seemed to me that the play indicated how obviously the restorative justice meeting doesn't increase the sentence, but it takes the experience down a different track, which can actually provide, maybe satisfaction's the wrong word,
Healing.
but some kind of resolution.
It takes the focus, because as a victim, you want retribution all of the time, initially.
You do.
You do want retribution. And what was interesting was RJ and that process took them away from retribution to actually moving forward. Moving from those rather negative feelings to a feeling of, yes, I can now not exactly cope with what happened, but understand what happened and move to a point where they forgave. One of them forgave, actually. Again, was empowering. But I must stress the point Lucy made earlier. You do not need to forgive to go through an RJ process. You can feel just as angry at the end of it with them as at the beginning. You don't need to forgive them.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about James's mother is that one of the things she really wanted was to see Jacob change his life. So it's complicated because the play shows Jacob, sort of tells the story of him changing his life. So that's one of the outcomes that she wanted. So,
which can't be guaranteed under any circumstances.
Which can't be guaranteed. And one of the skills of restorative work is to help people to arrive at solutions that are smart, so specific and measurable and time-bound. Like what does that actually look like in real life? That feeling that you want to get, someone to change their life. Let's put some clothes on that.
That moves us on to some more practical questions about RJ. I remember when we talked to Janika in a previous podcast, her ex-partner nearly killed her, in fact, and was in prison. She wanted to meet him in a restorative context and found it virtually impossible to have access to a restorative justice or to meet him. The system didn't encourage that kind of thing. Do you think the system needs to change to allow victims who want to get access to do so more easily?
What needs to happen is that people are told about it when they become victims of crime. And in fact, the public need to be more aware of it in a bigger public awareness campaign. And Why Me actually ran a national billboard campaign, which was a kind of good example of how to message restorative justice, how to tell people you have the right not to remain silent. But also every single contact with victims be reminded about restorative justice and told that that is an option for you. That would really help. And the other one for me is the police. The police are absolutely critical in ensuring that victims of crime are told about it, but then referred. So you have a right to be referred. That would unlock a lot of referrals.
What does that mean?
A right to be referred to a restorative justice service without the police or the probation or the prison staff making that decision for you. So you then say, I want this. A restorative justice professional then works with that person to assess suitability.
I mean, it's part of the problem that the prison and even the police, they might be concerned that this could go wrong, that a victim, somebody who's been harmed, wants to see the perpetrator of that harm in order to do something to them or tell them some stuff which is not in a kind of restorative way. Is that what's behind some of the reluctance of agencies?
I don't think so. I think it's a resource issue. I think the reality is, in the police's defence, we want more and more of them and give them less and less resource to do it. I think they are under a duty to, under the Victims' Code, tell people about RJ and they give you a leaflet, probably at a moment when you're not taking in anything or given, and it gets thrown away, of course. The point is they don't have the resource to push it at the moment, and there's not a statutory duty on them to do anything more than just let you know this exists. And so a leaflet does that. That's why we need a proper referral system whereby people have a right to be referred at every point during the process, not just at the outset where they meet the coppers for the first time.
There seems to be a lack of overall strategy from the government about how to implement restorative justice. And if we saw leadership from government with an action plan, which then laid out what each of the criminal justice agencies need to do, and the victim services, which is pathetic. Like, they're not engaged with restorative justice. They don't offer restorative justice. They gatekeep, and go, oh, well, Jane can't do it because she's a bit this or that. Refer to the restorative justice experts.
But why? Why are they not keen on it?
But very protective. People in criminal justice are very protective of the victims of crime and also people who've committed crime. So often they might say, well, he or she is on a drugs course, they're in prison or on this course, and if we do restorative justice, that's really going to disrupt everything. But restorative justice can always be done in parallel.
So they have a kind of risk aversion about restorative justice?
Yes. Well, because it's a kind of private discussion between individuals, which is facilitated by experts. But that is something that the state, if you like, has to let go of. And the state is represented by the police, the prison and the probation. They have to allow those people to talk to each other, which is seen as the highest risk.
Scary.
Yeah. And prisons don't like victims coming in. And we have this very rigid view of justice. And for me, it's that opening up the kind of gold mine of restorative justice. Not for everybody, but that's part of the assessment and the choice that we have in this country. But making sure that everyone knows about it, understands what it can do, and can pull it down at any stage. Because right after a crime, you don't always want that. At Why Me, we worked with someone called Teresa, who's a Why Me ambassador, and she wanted to meet her mother and ask her if she knew about her father's abuse of her in a historical child abuse case. And that was many, many, many years later. And it was completely liberating for her. She didn't meet her mother, but she got an answer through that process.
Paul, looking at the system, what do you think are the major barriers to it being offered to more victims?
Well, the structural barriers are this failure to offer referral at any point, and that must be there, and that's what we put in the amendment to legislation.
I mean, that has to be a meaningful referral, as you say, a leaflet.
Yeah.
And
no, leaflet's not a referral. A leaflet's just...
But even just referring, people need to know what, kind of really understand, don't they, to take up a referral?
Yes, well, I was looking at our amendment in the Victims and Courts Bill, and that gives a right to be referred at any point. And in my mind, that is actually allowing RJ agencies the right to say, look, this is available, do you want it? That's how I see it working. But it does require the state to let go. And as Lucy says, the state doesn't like letting go because suddenly this is a process not within the control of the justice system, it's outside of it. But there are... I've been looking, because I'm now the Northern Ireland spokesperson, so I've been looking at the position in Northern Ireland where RJ has moved on quite a long way. Interestingly, because of doubts over the justice system in the wake of the Troubles and the community fear of the justice system, they approached RJ as a different way of giving real justice. So I think there are signs in Northern Ireland and lessons in Northern Ireland we could bring back onto the mainland, and that's something I want to explore.
I did some work on this more than 15 years ago, and the amazing thing about Northern Ireland is in the Youth Justice Service, it is the default approach. They don't use fines and community sentences and so on unless that person who committed the crime absolutely refuses to take part in restorative justice. And interestingly, for under 18-year-olds who are convicted of crime, they offer and really promote restorative justice even if that child pleaded not guilty but was convicted. They still try and offer them restorative justice. I'd love to know more about that now because it was a long time ago that I looked at it, but it seemed really amazing at the time.
I mean, Paul, you're an MP on the Home Affairs Committee, I think. Do you think your colleagues, not party colleagues, other MPs, have a knowledge of RJ? Do you think people know what it is generally amongst parliamentarians?
I think there's an increasing knowledge. There's an all-party parliamentary group on restorative justice that pushes it. I've had conversations with 2 government ministers in the Justice Department who are both interested in pushing it. I know David Lammy is interested in pushing it. And the Prisons Minister, James Timpson, I've had meetings with him, and he's very keen on it. The fear is resources, of course. So what resource will it cost? And the argument one takes is, well, look, there's money up front, but in the end, there is a return because you will cut recidivism. But of course, that argument is hard to push when money is tight and they're looking at the pounds and pennies today, not tomorrow. But we're having conversations behind the scenes about our amendment to the bill to see whether the government will accept it.
Is that the answer, though, legislatively? Is that all we need, this amendment?
No, it's part of it. I think a statutory right for referral is part of the process. I think we need to publicise it constantly. That's why the play is, on the whole, a good and a positive thing. That's why billboard campaigns are. We've got to put victims at the heart of the criminal justice system, and that is part of it.
Perhaps that's a good point to draw our discussions to a close. We end these podcasts by asking each of our guests, if you were Lord Chancellor or in charge of the system, what one thing would you do to promote the use of restorative justice in England and Wales? Paul, you go first.
Mine is obvious from what I've said already. If I was now David Lammy, Lord Chancellor, I would agree to our amendment giving a statutory right to referral for restorative justice.
Lucy?
I would invest in a new narrative around restorative justice so that we had a clear messaging that was consistent right across the country about what it is and what it means for victims of crime.
When the government should do that?
The government should do that, yes.
OK. Penelope, what would you do?
I'm coming in a bit left field here. So the government funds lots of victims' organisations and agencies. And I did a search on the websites of victim support and the Victims Commissioner. And I just put restorative justice in and nothing meaningful came out. Now, can the government not get those organisations it funds to champion restorative justice? Rob, what about you?
Well, I think those are all great suggestions. I'm concerned this idea of giving people the chance to be referred at every opportunity. Is there the capacity in the system to deal with it if lots of people start saying, OK, I will give this a go. It can't be any worse than the court system. So I think RJ has often struggled because it's not clear who should be doing it. We've got a whole range of some police, some probation, youth justice, voluntary organisations like Lucy's been involved with. I think it needs to be better organised. So I would set up a restorative justice board to report in 6 months as to how restorative justice seriously gets off the ground in England and Wales.
Great. Thanks, Paul, Lucy and Rob. And if you'd like more information about restorative justice and about organisations which might help you access it, do refer to our programme notes. Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.